So, I believe that we're in a gap period. That's what we've been going over. Also called a grace period, also the church age, the betrothal period, and the time of the Gentiles. I've also shown that there have been examples given in Daniel concerning Israel's history that will come back again in the end times. Now, as we look into the book of Revelation, I will show you that this period can also be called the Sixth Empire. And the first thing I want to do is look at a verse in Revelation in chapter 17 of why I believe we're in the Sixth Empire. Now, the book of Revelation does go in chronological order. However, I'm going to jump to chapter 17, verse 10 for now. We'll discuss this chapter in more detail later. But right now, I just want to point out that this chapter has to deal with the political situation that the world will be in before the tribulation starts, which I believe that situation is now. Now, in verse 10, it says, "These are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, one is, and one is yet to come." Now, there are many interpretations of this. First, let's point out that the kings and kingdoms are interchangeable terms with reference to the heads on the dragon. If they mention kings, then it's the most prominent kings of those kingdoms. When they say kingdoms, it refers to the kingdoms themselves. And you'll see these terms interchangeable when we study the book of Revelation. So back to the verse, 5 have fallen and one is. The one in John's day is Rome. And remember, neither John nor Daniel mention Rome by name because it was very different from all the others and encompassed a lot more than the other empires. In fact, when Daniel asked about his vision, he didn't even ask about the Greeks or the Persians or the Babylonians. He was very concerned and very troubled by this fourth empire that crushed all, devoured all. And then the 10 horns that came up after it, meaning 10 kingdoms. At the time John penned this, we know Rome was the one that is. That's present tense. We know 3 previous ones, according to Daniel, were Greece, Persia, and Babylon. And then there are 2 others, because it says 5 have fallen. The other 2 are not really huge significance right now, but I believe it refers to Assyria and Egypt, and we'll get into that when we look into these chapters. But for now, we must understand the political situation which John is writing to us about. The empire ruling while he is writing is Rome. 5 are gone, and the next empire, the seventh, won't show up until the tribulation. That's why I say we are the sixth. Anyways, from the time that John wrote this around 90 AD until the future seventh empire at the tribulation period, there is a long gap period. Now, wait a minute, what's that? That's right. That's what I've been talking about. We are in a gap period between the 69th and 70th week. It's called the grace period, the church age, the betrothal, the sixth empire. We are still part of Daniel's fourth great terrible beast in prophecy, an empire, a Romanized type of empire. We have been living in a Romanized world, which is also referred to as the sixth empire in Revelation, which we will see when we study Revelation. The sixth empire is a Romanized world before the tribulation starts. Now, in order to give you an understanding of what I mean, we have to look at some Roman history. Now, if we start with Theodosius, we will find that he reunited the empire for the last time. He was the sole emperor of the empire when he died in 395 AD. However, upon his death, his sons divided the empire for good, and it would never be united again. Honorius became emperor in the west, and Arcadius became the emperor in the east. There were now 2 emperors, one in the east and one in the west. And in chapter 2 of Daniel, the statue with iron legs, that's right, there's 2 legs. That's because Rome became divided, and that prophecy was fulfilled right here. Now, in 395 AD, the barbarians were invading the Roman Empire. A lot of tribes, like the Gothic ones, wanted to settle within the empire because they were being pushed by Eastern barbarian tribes, namely the Huns. They weren't looking to conquer or fight, they wanted to settle within the empire. But Rome, due to her pride and stupidity, did not allow this for the most part, because they did allow some tribes to settle, but usually they did not, and destructive wars were fought. And eventually, in 410 AD, Alaric, a Visigoth chieftain, sacked Rome and plundered it. Now, since the Goths were Christians themselves, their plunder was controlled, and then they moved south. Now, we're not going to get into the history of all this, but Alaric was actually dealing with Rome. He wanted to be part of Rome and carry on as a king and let another emperor rule. And Rome made promises which they broke, and eventually Alaric sacked Rome. But even he knew the importance of keeping Roman institutions alive. When Alaric left Rome, he moved south and he died, and the Visigoths left Italy. Now, Rome carried on for another 45 years. Then a Vandal chieftain named Gaiseric invaded Rome in 455 AD. He came from Africa, which he had taken over, but Pope Leo persuaded Gaiseric to not destroy the city and kill the inhabitants if he were to open the city gates to them. So, true to their word, the Vandals came in. They did not slaughter the Romans. They did not destroy the buildings. They just ransacked it and looted all the houses, looted the Roman treasuries for 2 weeks, and they left. Now, also, I didn't mention, but you must realize these chieftains were officers in the Roman army commanding the Roman auxiliaries. So they understood what Rome was and how it worked. They were looking to be part of it or rule it, and if possible, not to destroy it. Now, about 16 years later, Rhizamir, a Swabian chieftain, he was the main power around northern Italy, and by this time the Roman capital wasn't in Rome. The emperor and the capital was moved to Ravenna. So Rome was quite easy to take. It wasn't defended as heavily as it was. And so Rome did whatever Rhizamir wanted, and he left it alone. But he ended up laying siege to it anyways in 472, but then he died. And for the next 3 years, some German barbarian chieftains fought for the control of Rome. Now, understand what I'm saying here. They weren't fighting Romans anymore. They were fighting each other to see who would rule Rome. A chief named Odoacer won out, and he deposed the Roman Emperor Romulus Augustus at Ravenna, and in 476 he took Rome and he took the title King of Italy. He was an Arian Christian, and he left most of the religious institutions and public offices intact. He even sent a message to the Eastern Roman Emperor claiming he honored the emperor, but he would be king of Italy. Now, the point of what I'm telling you here is to show you that Rome was not being destroyed by these Germanic tribes. Like uh, when Babylon was there, Persia came in, took it over. They were the new ruling power. Persia was then conquered by the Greeks. The Greeks were the new ruling power. Then eventually, the Romans kind of came over, took over Greece, and they're the new ruling power. Well, nobody has taken out Rome. Everything is still carrying on. They just have different leaders. And in fact, the German people were mostly Christians and they wished to carry on Roman traditions with the help from the Roman papacy. Both the barbarians and the Roman Catholic Church grew strong. Why do you think the Roman Catholic Church adopted all the barbarian pagan rituals? Because they grew together hand in hand. Remember, most of these barbarians and their chiefs were Roman soldiers serving in the Roman army themselves, so it was easy for them to assimilate the Roman life. Now, in Daniel's prophecy concerning the statue, after the two legs, you come to the feet, which were mixed with clay and iron. That's what starts happening after 476 AD. The barbarian powers still fought each other. The Eastern Roman emperor still came over and tried to fight the barbarians. So when it says it mixed with clay and iron, it means they would try to unite the empire again, but they would never be able to achieve this. So the prophecy on the statue where the feet are has been fulfilled for the last 2,000 years. Everybody wanted to be like Rome. The popes eventually crowned a Western Roman emperor, Charlemagne, in 800 AD and now they had their own emperorship lineage, again claiming direct descendants of Roman emperors. And as tradition has it, popes became descendants of St. Peter. Basically, the world was trying to become the third Rome. Now, you had French kings that were claiming emperorship after this. You had the German Empire calling itself the Holy Roman Empire at one time. After that, the German leaders called themselves Kaisers, which means Caesar. The Russian leaders called themselves Tsars, which means Caesar. And now I don't have a lot of evidence of this next one, but I believe the word Kong from the Mongol Empire even means Caesar. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire lasted for another 1,000 years, but in 1453, the Ottoman Turks conquered Byzantium, which was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. That's how long it still carried on for, up until 1453. And when they took Byzantium, the sultans there, they called their sultans the Sultans of Rum because they knew this to be Rome, this territory. Now, almost the whole world carried on with Roman institutions and Roman ideas. Look at the language. Ancient Romans spoke Latin, which spread throughout the world. As a language group, it came to be called the Romance languages. These became French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, Catalan, and Italian. Much of the English and South American language is based on Latin. The English alphabet is based on Latin. And even our judicial system still uses Latin. In law, the Romans brought us the preliminary system in which a case would be heard to decide if there was enough evidence to send the case to court to be judged by your peers. The Roman judicial system is the basis for many of the judicial systems throughout Western Europe and the United States. When the Romans conquered a country, they brought them law. That is to say, with the Romans, they brought equality under the law for all. Now, it was supposed to work like that, but, not to say it did, but because it was harsh and hard. That's why Jesus Christ says, law exposes your guilt, it cannot save you. That's why, contrast, Jesus Christ gives us mercy during this gap period, this grace period. But the Romans brought us law, and today that's what we live under in our world. It's law. We have international courts, world courts, and in Western Europe and the United States, we base everything off law. Terms like habeas corpus, veto, affidavit, pro bono, and many others were all used in ancient Rome. In fact, they came from Rome's ancient 12 tables of law. Much of the world's symbols for the medicine, that snake around the staff, known as the Asclepius, and that is taken from the Greek goddess of medicine, which the Romans have acquired and we have acquired. This symbol of the bowl of Hygeia is the most recognized symbol of medicine around the world, and it has also come from the Greeks down through the Romans. There's no doubt that Cicero's ideology of his republic found its way into the American system. John Adams' idea of the three branches of government came from Rome. The idea of civilizations from Toynbee, the land of freedom, which Americans use all over their inscriptions, can hardly be an innovative American idea. It all has its roots in Roman civilization. Our alphabet, our calendar, our names of our planets all come from Rome. We are a Romanized world. The prophecy of Daniel's statue of the feet being partly of clay and iron is fulfilled. The world is trying to get back to this one world government or the new world order, but hasn't been able to do it. We're trying to get back to that glory ancient Roman Empire, but we can't do it. So keep this in mind when we get to Revelation. We are the sixth empire, which is the same as the fourth and terrible beast in Daniel chapter 7. That's different from all the other empires before it, and that they never give it a name. I believe it's significant that they never gave it a name. How can you name this? For 2,000 years, it's a terrible beast that has bullied, manipulated, cheated, lied, and used hard-working people to set up a system that elitists who don't work get rich off of. Wall Street, bankers, ruling families, monarchies, media, advertising are all corrupt forms of control to take power from the people. No wonder this empire is described as dreadful, terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. In the last video, I showed you that Jesus Christ told his disciples what would be happening in our world, and he painted a grim picture. Wars, rumors of wars, nation would rise against nation, pestilence, earthquakes, famines. And this is what is happening in our world we live in. It's the sixth empire named in the book of Revelation that's been governing us for the last 2,500 years. That's where we're at politically right now. We are in a gap between the 69th and 70th week, the church age, the grace period, the betrothal period, the sixth empire. So now we know where we're at in prophecy. So what must take place next? Well, what does it say in Daniel chapter 2? The iron legs have been fulfilled, the feet have been fulfilled. After the feet, it's 10 toes. And in chapter 7, after the fourth empire, what comes up from our most terrible, terrifying empire that devours the whole world? It's the 10 horns. We are looking for these 10 kingdoms, and I'll tell you, we see evidence of them right now. We all know the European Union has 27 countries in it. The African Union has 55 countries. Now, the Arabs have so many leagues, I suspect they will narrow it down to 2 or 3 federations, and they'll all be Arab and Muslim countries. There is the USMCA. This is the latest agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico for the North American Union. The Union of South America fizzled out, but currently the Andean League is trying to build back some sort of federation. The Pacific Union is currently being proposed with 16 member countries. Now, Asia has yet to form a real union, although there are some ideas. Now, you see where I'm going with this. The world's going to form up into these federations, and it's happening right now. This is what you should be paying attention to because, according to Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7, after the 10 toes and the 10 horns, the little horn will come up and subdue 3 of them. But wait, we still have a mystery to tell you. Before this little horn comes up and reveals itself, the church, I believe, must be taken away. And that is another controversial issue, but I believe in it, and I'll show you why. Now, there seems to be 2 distinct appearances by our Lord Jesus Christ. That's why I believe there is a rapture and a second coming. Let me show you. We looked at Jesus telling his disciples in the Olivet Discourse about his second coming, and in the book of Revelation, it talks about his second coming. And in fact, the Old Testament prophets all talk about it. It is a momentous event. Every eye is going to see him. It talks about it as lightning flashes from the east to the west. That's what's going to be like when the Son of Man comes. Those who pierced him will mourn. It's a spectacular event when Jesus Christ returns to conquer and destroy. Now, if you go to the book of 1 Corinthians 15:51, Paul said, "Hey, I tell you a mystery." So stop right there. Why a mystery? Mystery is something that was not recognizable in the Old Testament because it is a church thing, but is revealed in the New Testament. The second coming was widely preached about, and all the Jews knew it. So that right there catches my eye. All the Jews knew about the second coming. Their Messiah was coming to conquer and set up Israel as the ruling kingdom on earth. That's why the disciples thought Jesus was going to destroy the Romans. His entry into Jerusalem on a donkey was a well known Old Testament prophecy that all the city realized and held him as Messiah and thought he would usher in the kingdom. Now, I've already talked about this in the last video. And the disciples kept asking him, "When are you going to set up the kingdom?" Even when Jesus rose from the dead in Acts chapter 1 verse 6, they still asked him the question. And Jesus responded with, I can imagine what he looked like, wow, you guys are still expecting this kingdom and you're still talking about it. And that's why he tells them at this point, it's not for you to know, only the Father. It's like, look, nobody knows. Stop asking about it. Now, he's been telling them that the disciples are going to establish this church, which is his church. And they're still missing the point because this stuff was not talked about or taught in the Old Testament. Now, he tells them to wait for the Holy Spirit. Why? Because the things of Christ can only be understood with the Spirit. In verse 11, he will return just as he left by a cloud. So, him returning in this cloud is totally different from him returning as a conqueror on a white horse at the second coming. Now, let's get back to Paul. Paul seems to be saying something different than the second coming. Look at the Thessalonians. They knew of the teaching of Jesus Christ's second coming and Jesus' redemptive return. It was a big discussion and concern in the church, and they were worried about it because of the afflictions they were going through. They thought they missed the rapture, and they were worried about their loved ones who died. But in First Thessalonians chapter 4, 16 through 18, Paul says how the dead first will rise, then we who are alive will meet Jesus in the clouds and meet the Lord in the air. This is my first point. We meet Jesus in the air in the clouds. In John 14, 3, he comes to receive us to himself. In the second coming, Jesus comes from heaven to the earth and his feet touch the ground, according to Zechariah 14. All the saints will be with him already. And then he sends out his angels to gather all the elect still on the earth who became saved during the tribulation. He doesn't receive them unto himself in the clouds. You recall the reference in Matthew 24 of the saying, two in the field, one will be there, one will be taken. The angels gathered the elect after the tribulation. In the rapture, Jesus comes in the clouds and receives us to himself. Okay, there's a difference there to me, no matter how I look at it and I study it. Now, in point two, his second coming is as a conqueror to show the Jews and fulfill his promise to them. This is full of signs. Remember, every eye will see him. The Jews always want to see a sign. That's taught in Scripture. And they're going to see the signs when Jesus comes to conquer. Now, in Matthew 24:29, it says immediately after the tribulation of those days, that's when this is going to happen. In the rapture, there are no signs at all. It can be any time. Jesus says in John 14:3, he will return and receive us unto himself just as he left. Now let's think about this logically. Does it make any sense that Jesus Christ is leaving heaven to come conquer the earth with an army? Then he snatches the Christians up to him in the middle of the year, adds them to this army, and then come right back down to the earth. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. We are the army coming with him. We're already in heaven. That's my second point. Now, point three. He is the bridegroom returning for his bride, the church. This is in Revelation 19, 7 through 10. This is the betrothal period, which will be over now. Now you have to understand in Judaism, a bridegroom would go to the bride's house and enter into an agreement. Christ the groom came to earth, set up this agreement. He paid the dowry for his bride, which is his blood. Then he leaves and goes back to his father's house and prepares a place for his bride. This is in John 14:2. Jesus went and prepared a place for his bride when he ascended to heaven. Now the betrothal period in Jewish tradition takes place, and it's for like a year and can be longer. We've been doing it for 2,000 years, but this is the betrothal period. This is the grace period, the church age we are in. The bride, meanwhile, is making herself ready and proves herself worthy. That's us, the church. Only true believers will be invited. Then he returns from the Father's house to get his bride unannounced. She has to be ready at all times. She doesn't know when he's coming to get her. When the groom gets near the bride's house, a trumpet is sounded. And then he receives her. Then they go back to the Father's place, which he has prepared. Then there is a wedding feast that lasts typically for 7 days. In Revelation 19, 7 to 10, we are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. For how long? During the 7 year tribulation. That is what's taking place on earth. And this is what is taught in the Bible. Now, another point is Jesus told the Jews and anyone that are still here in the tribulation to watch for the abomination of desolation. Now, the church is told to watch for Jesus. You can read these. I'm not going to read them all, but in Titus 2:13, Colossians 1:27, 1 Peter 1:13, 2 Timothy 4:8, that's 2 Timothy 4:8, Philippians 3:20-21, John 4:13, Colossians 1 chapter 1 verse 5, Ephesians chapter 1 verse 18, and I can keep going. Now, does it make sense that we're being taught this is our hope? But meanwhile, we're going to be in the tribulation, hiding, fearing for our lives. People will be killed. There's going to be wars. The sun will scorch you, causing pain and agony. You're going to be trying to hide in caves and in shadows. There's going to be a man trying to murder you because you believe in Jesus Christ. The stars and planets will be falling from the sky. Meteors will be hitting the planet. All the fish in the sea will die. Drinking water will be poisoned. It'll be the worst time ever in the existence of humanity. Yet, we're supposed to have this hallelujah, Kimbaya, blessed hope experience looking for Jesus during all this. It makes no sense at all. That's not the way it works. Now in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 10, we are waiting for the imminent return of our Lord Jesus Christ and will be rewarded for having been faithful while not seeing him but believing in him during this grace period, the church age. Christians are never told to watch for the abomination. There's a big difference between people watching for the abomination of desolation and people watching for the blessed hope of Christ's return. Now, those are the major points for me, and believe me, there's more, and we'll get in a little bit more in the next video about it when we start the book of Revelation. But I wanted you to understand the political situation we're in right now. The 10 federations need to be formed up. They're getting there. And then at some point, the man of sin is revealed and the rapture takes place. We'll talk about that in the next video.